Hello and welcome to this video, and this is the big one. It's the 10 greatest jazz fusion albums of all time. The objective list, not my opinion, not your opinion. This is the greatest 10. Of course we can't do that, can we? We'd be brilliant if we could. So before I start on this video, let's just explain the criteria. Normally when I create a ranking list, I don't just take my personal taste into account. So all of those of you who are going to put a comment saying it's just about a personal taste, it's not just about personal taste. That's just one criteria. Another criteria we can use, which is far more objective, is popularity. How many albums did this sell? Right? We can look at technical skill, right? How well has the album been executed in terms of the musicianship, in terms of the production, and I've taken production into account on this one far more than I normally would. And of course, innovation, okay? Did this album pioneer new things? So I've taken all that into account. I've tried to step back as much as I can. And I tell you what I've fundamentally tried to do with this list. I've tried to come up with 10 albums that if you have never listened to jazz fusion before and you wanted to go out and buy 10 albums that really represent the genre at its best, but are also accessible to a new listener. So albums like Bitches Brew are not on this list, and you know there's an argument for that. You know, they're popular and innovative, the musicianship that's got all those things that I just said. But I think they don't really define the genre as it became. And for someone who wants to explore the genre in an accessible way, that album wouldn't be so great. But I have taken innovation and avant-garde into account. I've tried to take all of those into account. So have you got an idea of the criteria I'm using for this? Do you understand what I am trying to do? You know, so here are, if you were wanting to start your jazz fusion collection, here are the 10 albums that I think you should go and get. In many cases, they're not my favourite albums even by that band, and I will get into that as the video starts, and it's going to start right now with number 10. So what have I got at number 10? I have Wired by Jeff Beck, right? I think my favourite jazz fusion tune is Lead Boots. And if someone said, what is jazz fusion, what does it sound like? I think I would play them Lead Boots. It does everything that jazz fusion should do. But this is an absolutely incredible album. It's beautifully recorded. I know Ken Scott's, said, he's not so happy with the production on this, but I think that's probably because once the album was done, it was handed over to Jan Hammer, and Jan Hammer actually did the mix and finished this album off. And Jan Hammer's a genius. Anyone watches my channel will tell you that I think that Jan Hammer's a genius. I think he's one of the greatest artists in the jazz fusion genre, and he is all over this album, as is my favourite genre, Narada Michael Walden. It's all sounding very subjective now, isn't it? But no, I think this album is very, very important. And also Jeff Beck, he's not a jazz musician, he's a rock musician. He's come from that sort of classic British 60s rock scene that includes Jimmy Page, it includes Ritchie Blackmore, it includes Clapton, and it includes Hendrix by the fact that he was in that scene. And Jeff Beck's one of the great players from that. He's a pioneer of rock music, and in the 70s he becomes interested in fusion, and he makes this album, and this album sells a ton of records. It's one of the first fusion albums I ever owned, right? And this is the album that got me into fusion. This and Crosswinds by Billy Cobham. So if it can do it for me, it can do it for you too, and it can do it to your friend who you're trying to get into fusion. Give him a bit of Jeff Beck Wired. Right, what have I got at number 9? I have got Enigmatic Ocean by Jean-Luc Ponty. Jean-Luc Ponty was a big selling artist in the 70s. He's a true pioneer. The electric violin is a definitive sound that's come from jazz fusion, I think. And so many bands use that, and Jean-Luc Ponty is perhaps the great exponent on that. In the late 70s, he made a series of very successful but artistically very rewarding albums. And I think they all vie you know, Aurora, Cosmic Messenger, they're all as good as each other. This one is just pipped to the post because, of course, it's got Alan Holdsworth on there. And so you need an album with Alan Holdsworth on. If you want your fusion collection, you need to have him there somewhere, because when you hear Holdsworth for the first time, that can open a door to all that world as well. So this is a really great album. There's an argument that this is still actually the best, even without the Holdsworth stuff, of the sort of 70s classic Jean-Luc Ponty albums. But this is as good as any, and that's the one I'm putting forward. That's what you go and buy at number 9. Enigmatic Ocean by Jean-Luc Ponty. Right, what have we got at number 8? One of the biggest selling jazz albums in history, and it's Elegant Gypsy by Aldi Meola. This sold 1 million copies, I think. All right, Aldi Meola, of course, was the guitarist with Return to Forever. With Return to Forever, one of the great jazz fusion bands. Of course, they're going to be on this list, but the question is where. When he split, he was equally successful, and I think that was down to the fact at the time he was like the fastest, most intense guitarist on the planet. With this album, he sort of further defines, because he'd done it with Return to Forever, but he sort of further defines his take on fusion, which is a mixture of jazz, it's a mixture of Latin American, flamenco, and almost heavy metal. All right, and this is a heavy album. This album really influenced the prog metalers. It really influenced guitarists like Yngwie Malmsteen. He made a run of albums after he left Return to Forever, Land of the Midnight Sun, which I think is possibly my favourite. He made Casino, Splendido Hotel, Electric Rendezvous, Scenario. These are all really great albums. I've done a video, I think, over at Sea of Tranquility on that. But I think the masterpiece is this one. This is the definitive one. This is the one you go and get first. Elegant Gypsy. It also features Paco de Lucia. So you get him as well in your collection when you buy this album. At number 8. Right. I have to have an outlier. I always have to have an outlier on my list. Something that people go, oh, I didn't expect that to be there. And that's the one that all the people in the comments will say should have gone and should have been replaced by something else, and they'll all be shouting, you should have put so and so on the list, you know, and where's Bitches Brew, where's Jack Johnson, why aren't they on the list, you know, where's the 11th House, that's a classic album, yeah, very innovative, that's true, but I really do believe this is one of the greatest fusion albums ever made, and it's Oh Yeah by Jan Hammer. The opening Magical Dog, I think in terms of intense jazz fusion, is perhaps the greatest jazz fusion track ever. It's either that or Lead Boots. Jan Hammer's on both of them anyway. I'm a Jan Hammer fan, can you tell? I'm a Jan Hammer fan. That's the bottom line. I absolutely love the bloke. I think he's an utter genius. And he's just so way past everybody else. And he's on this album. Right? If you're a fusion fan and you haven't got this album, go now and listen to Magical Dog and tell me what you think, because I know it's going to floor you. It's beautifully produced, beautifully recorded. The musicianship is off the scale. He's doing everything that he pioneered in the Mavish Orchestra and taking it further out. There's vocals on here. Some people don't like the vocals. I absolutely love the vocals. I love the songs on here. There's 2 songs, but some people have said that that spoils the album for them. I don't think so. It's just 2 tracks, and listen to the playing on them. They're so funky and they're fantastic. So that's what I've got at number 7, Oh Yeah by Jan Hammer. Right, we need to get a move on. Right, so at number 6, I have this Jaco Pastorius. From this point on, we really are dealing with utter classic albums, right? I can't really differentiate these, really, you know, so stupid. And here we have one of the great jazz fusion albums of all time, Jaco Pastorius' self-titled debut album, the album that changed the bass world. It really did. He does everything on this. He does everything you possibly could do on bass, but he does everything you could do with a jazz fusion group. You know, there's small group stuff, there's stuff with an orchestra, there's funky stuff, there's songs, there's experimental stuff, there's really soloing at certain points. This is an incredible album. It features Narada Michael Walden again on Come On, Come Over, which also features Sam and Dave. Narada Michael Walden is featured on this list so often. I've really tried not to, but he's all over it. So, you know, these are the guys as far as I'm concerned. Right, so Jaco Pastorius there at number 6. Jaco's like a household name. He really, more than just his bass playing, I think his charisma, his looks, his personality helped propel Weather Report, you know, to being not just an instrumental fusion band, but almost perceived as almost like a pop band, a commercial band. That's down to Jaco. This is something that you have to take account when you're making these videos, is the impact on culture that these artists have and their charisma, because that usually is the last defining thing that really puts these albums over the edge. Right, so what do I have at number 5? Number 5, I have Spectrum by Billy Cobham. Billy Cobham had already achieved legendary status when he made this album through his work with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He could have easily gone on and done that again. But on this album, he takes the concepts and approaches that he pioneered with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and he fuses that with a stronger rhythm and blues, funk, soul approach. And it's also with the use of Tommy Bolin, and this is the genius thing, and this is the thing I mean about charisma. The use of Tommy Bolin on this album. Tommy Bolin just shines. Tommy Bolin, again, like Jeff Beck, is not a jazz guitarist. He's a rock guitarist. And Cobham utilises him in an incredible way. It's that Hendrix thing. It's Hendrix hangs over fusion, right? It's almost like his genre, but he died. You feel like if he'd have lived, he would have himself invented fusion. Okay, and I think people like Miles Davis and John McLaughlin and Larry Coryell and Billy Cobham, all these people, they wanted that Hendrix thing in their music, and so they went looking for guitarists who could do it. And in this case, he found Tommy Bolin. Tommy Bolin is actually somewhere between Hendrix and Jeff Beck, but what he does is absolutely remarkable on this album, and his solo on Stratus makes that track one of the classic fusion tracks. It's a must-have track, and you have to hear it. Often, I work in a music college, and I'll play, you know, my students who are very young and don't know any of this stuff, I'll play them certain tracks. And Stratus, again, is a door opener to so many people when they first hear that. As is Quadrant 4, the opener. You know, if you listen to a track like Hot for Teacher by Van Halen, you can hear that it has its DNA back in Quadrant 4 by Billy Cobham. And through that, we get the whole of that sort of, you know, heavy metal, double bass drum and thrash metal. It's all coming from here, you know. So this is why this album's so important. I've got it at number 5 on my list. Imagine having Spectrum at number 5. So what's better than Spectrum? Well, we talk about that funk R&B influence that came in to fusion. In many cases, it sort of ruined jazz fusion, and it sort of it weakened it. And the record companies really were pushing artists trying to have hit records and make crossover tracks that could be played in, I suppose, discos. You know, you could have a dance hit. You know. But where that started, it was so heavy, and no more heavier than on this 1974 Herbie Hancock's Headhunters. This is an incredible fusion album. It contains Chameleon, which of course is in our Desert Island Discs fusion tracks as well, along with many of the others I've mentioned. Although this is a funky album, they fly. And on the track Sly, they fly as much as anybody else has ever in the history of fusion. So yeah, that's what I've got at number 4, Headhunters. You know, really funky but heavy album. So we're to the top 3 now. Okay. All of these could be argued as being contentious, and all of these 3 albums are not my favourite albums by the artist I'm discussing. So at number 3, I have Romantic Warrior by Return to Forever. I think my favourite Return to Forever album is probably Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy. Where Have I Known You Before is equal to that, and for many people that's their favourite Return to Forever album. No Mystery is great, you know, but I think they drop down. The funk gets to them on No Mystery, you know, and they're not headhunters. But on this album they change label. They pull in, which is, I imagine, is Ken Scott. It was produced by Chick Corea. Doesn't say who's engineered it, but the production on this album is way better than the first three Return to Forever albums. And they just notch it up. This is one of the first Fusion albums I bought, and I can remember looking at the speakers in astonishment when I put the opener Medieval Overture out. The sound of it, the playing of it, the brutal viciousness of the arrangements, you know, the attack, the virtuosity. This is one of the great prog albums. What did I just say? It's one of the great fusion albums of all time, but it's also one of the great prog albums of all time. It's just one of the greatest albums of all time. This is it, Return to Forever, Romantic Warrior. We got it there at number 3. Right, so what we have at number 2? And in number 2, I decided to put Weather Report's Heavy Weather. Weather Report have got to be on the list, and they've got to be high up. I think when people say jazz fusion, they think of 3 bands, Return to Forever, Weather Report and the Mavish Nuxtra. My favourite album, of course, if you go and check out my videos by Weather Report, is Black Market. My second favourite album is this. This is absolutely beautiful album, but this is the album that has Birdland on it. This is the album that sold 1 million copies. This is the album that crossed over. Why did it cross over? I think there's a number of things. I think Zawinul's able to write really hooky riffs. His use of the studio has got to a point where he's really under control and knows how to manipulate that. There's some really hooky stuff on here. Of course, it's a beautiful album, and it also has a disco influence which Black Market doesn't have. Birdland starts off sounding like a disco tune. The fact that he does everything with the composition, it's like a mini orchestral suite, that track, nobody seems to notice because of the genius of Zawinul's writing. Teen Town is also a disco tune if you think about it. It's a disco bebop tune. So there's something about this album that really sets the stage for the commercial side of fusion. Now, does that make it artistically weaker? Not at all. It's an astonishing album with beautiful playing, beautiful compositions. The second track on here, A Remark I Made to You, is one of the great fusion ballads of all time. It contains you know, classics after classic. Birdland, A Remark I Made to You, Teen Town, Palladium. They're all classics, you know, that we would put in our Desert Island discs of fusion tracks. It's an absolutely incredible album. So that's what I've got at number 2. At number 1, can you guess who's at number 1? Right? You all know who's at number 1. Well, which album is it going to be? Well, I'll tell you this. At number 1, I have the Mavish Nuxtra. The Mavish Nuxtra really are the band that defined what fusion is. In 1971, they defined what it is. They got it right. Up until then, everyone's trying to work out what fusion is, and they're not getting it right. Even Miles Davis on Bitches Brew and Jack Johnson, even Tony Williams' Lifetime, they're trying to work out what fusion is, but they don't get it right. When the Mavish Nuxtra get it right, they suddenly sell a ton of records. That's where the genre is born. Now, my favourite album by the Mavish Nuxtra is Visions of the Emerald Beyond. And it pains me not to have that on this list, but I didn't want to have more than one album by each artist, right? So that's my favourite Mavish Nuxtra album. My favourite album by the original Mavish Nuxtra, the classic one, is Birds of Fire. It's the first one I bought. The production's better for that, for me, than the first album. It also features Billy Cobham's double bass drums. It also features Jan Hammer's Moog synthesizer player, which I think is a really important sound. But if I step back objectively and I want to say what is the greatest Mavish Nuxtra album of all time, objectively, you know, so you can go back to my list where I went through my ranking of the Mavish Orchestra albums, and you can see this is different. But in terms of this more objective list where I sit back, it has to be this one. So this, if I really sit back and think about it, I believe is the greatest jazz fusion album or jazz rock album of all time. The Inner Mountain Flame by the Mavish Orchestra featuring John McLaughlin. Right, you can go on this channel and you will find a whole video on this album. You will find a whole video on every single Mavish Orchestra album. You will see 2 videos where I rank all the John McLaughlin albums. You will find videos on Shakti. You will find a ton of stuff on the Mavish Orchestra. Right, I've got about 3 or 4 minutes to talk about this. What have I not said about this before that I'm going to say now? I think we have to consider with this list the importance of popularity and commercialness. And I know I'm going to get it in the comments below. I know people are going to say, you know, just because lots of people like something doesn't make it good. It doesn't. And at the top of this video, I explained all the things. You have to put all those things together that make something good. But the reason why we talk about genres, the reason why we talk about bands, the reason why any of this stuff is ever mentioned on this channel is because it sold, because it was popular. The more I have done this channel and got into the history of stuff, the more I've realised that people try to get styles of music, they experiment, but it's only when something is popular that that genre or style is then defined. There's whole hosts of different genres of styles. There's whole host of different artists and musicians who are hoping to create a new style of music. You know, if you think of Miles Davis on the corner, he really wanted to create something, some sort of Afro electric jazz that would speak to, you know, the black community, the young black community at the time. He didn't succeed. So there is not a genre created by that album. It wasn't a success. It's a really, really important album. There's loads of examples of this. Jazz fusion, right? What really defines it, I think, is to start off is Bitches Brew by Miles Davis. But that's not a fusion album. That's like an experimental free jazz album with rock grooves on there. You know, that's what that album is. Nobody who listens to jazz fusion will hear anything that sounds like Return to Feather or Weather Report or Mavish Orchestra on Bitches Brew. When the Mavish Orchestra came out with the Inner Mountain Flame, it did something, right? And it goes beyond just popularity and sales. It also affected culture. I think they became a band that represented something. They represented spiritual enlightenment, of esoteric, mystical self-exploration. I think people went to see the Mavish Orchestra to have an experience, and it was their live shows that really defined them and made them successful. By the time they made Birds of Fire, the second album, that album was able to penetrate the American top 20 albums. That's an incredible feat for an instrumental album, but especially for one that's so difficult. Inner Mountain Flame is dark, menacing, it's uplifting, it's wears you out. You know, it contains musicianship that no one had ever heard before. It contains guitar playing that nobody ever heard before. It's an incredible, groundbreaking album. It's definitely the most groundbreaking on this list. It sold a ton of records. It made the genre popular. It made the Mavish Orchestra popular. It was innovative. It's let down a little bit by its production, but actually I feel that the way it was recorded gives it a sort of punk rock edge, which a lot of the other fusion albums on this list don't have, and that sets it apart as well. So that's my claim with this video, that I think the greatest jazz fusion album of all time objectively is Inner Mountain Flame by the Mavish Orchestra. Okay, when I did this, I didn't think that was going to be the case. This is what's really interesting. You know, anybody watching my videos, you know I'm making all this up as I go along. I always am, you can probably tell. And it's interesting to arrive at these conclusions. So that's where we're at. If you like this video, like it. If you want to see more, please press the subscription button there. Please put your comments down below. You know, I'm sure there's a billion albums that you all want to put on the list. Well, you can't, because it's not your list, it's my list. That's the way it is. This is my list. The objective 10, written in stone, greatest jazz fusion albums of all time. There they are. That's it. It can't be argued with, so don't bother. I'm only joking. And please put your opinion in. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you want to support me to do more of these, there's my Patreon there. Go and click on that. You know, there's a ton of video content there and a whole bunch of stuff, you know. But really, you know, I appreciate anyone who supports me doing this. This channel's growing. It's going somewhere. Where it's going to go, I don't know. I just don't know. Anyway, it's the end of the video. Can't think of anything else to say. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.